Today we are going to build this complete Ludo game in JavaScript from scratch in a simple way and without using any libraries or frameworks. If this excites you, then keep watching the video. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Sohail and today we will build this Ludo game in JavaScript without using any libraries or frameworks like React or Angular, which is very important to sharpen your vanilla JavaScript skills. This is a great project for your resume and you will be surprised to see how simple it is. So make sure you watch the video till the end. With that said, let's get started. I have a simple setup done here already. So I have my index.html file, one main.js file, and I have Ludo folder where I have a bunch of files. So our main file is ludo.js where we will store our Ludo logic, and then we have one file ui.js where we will handle the DOM manipulation, so that in ludo.js file we can focus just on the game logic. We also have one constants.js file where we will be storing our constants. I have one Ludo image which we can use as a background, and finally we have one empty style file where we will write styles for our Ludo game. And in our index.html I have linked this style file and also have linked my main.js file. Now we have mentioned type as module here because we are gonna use ES6 modules. If you don't know about it, I'll leave a link in the description. Using ES6 modules simply allows us to be able to export any function or any variable or anything from a file, and we can import the same in another file. So I'll go to my ludo.js file, and here I will define a class Ludo and I will export it. I've added a simple console message in my constructor. Let us import this class in our main.js file. And let's create an instance of this class. Alright, let's run our code in VS Code's live server. And as you can see, the console message is being displayed here. Alright, let's move on to writing some HTML. So I'll go back to my index.html file. Let's start off by creating a container. And inside this, we basically need two elements or two containers again. One to store our Ludo game and one for the footer where we will have our buttons. Here in my footer, I will create a row where we will have a dice button and a reset button, and also we can display the dice value. Alright, let's write some CSS. I will go to my style.css and let us style the Ludo container first. I will give it a border just so that we can see it. Let us give it some width. I will give 450 pixels. And then we have our Ludo element. I'm giving it a height of 450 pixels and width as 100% so that it becomes a square. Let me actually move this down here. And yeah, here we can see it. Let us add some margin so that it comes in the center. And let me give this a background image. Alright, we can remove this border. Let us write some quick styles for our buttons. Let us also display the active player. So I'll go in my index.html again, and below this row I will create one element. Alright, let's create some elements for our player pieces. So inside our Ludo I will create one more container. I will call it player pieces, and inside this I will create a player piece element. Let us give it some attributes like the player ID, which says which player it belongs to, and the piece ID, which can be index of this. Let's create a bunch of copies and update the piece IDs. We can do the same thing for player 2. Alright, let's style these elements. Now we want this to take full height and width. And then let's style the pieces. I'm specifying the width and height in percentage. That's because in future if I want to make this game responsive, this will help me. Let's give it a border so that we can see it. Now here are our 8 elements. Let us give some background colors. We will have different colors for different players. Now let's grab the player 1 piece first. Now we have this player ID attribute. You can use that. And I will give this a light blue background color. Oops. And for player 2 we can give it a light green color. Alright, now to position these piece elements I will put position as absolute, and then we can use the top and left properties to position them wherever we want, something like this. Now we can do this from our JavaScript, so let's comment this. Now whenever a user rolls the dice, we want to highlight the pieces so that it becomes quite intuitive that the piece can be moved or clicked upon. Let's define some styles for highlighted player piece. And let's add some animation. I will create this animation spin. Let's define the keyframes for our spin animation. So we need to start with 0% and the transform rotate would be 0 degrees, and then for 100% it should be 360 degrees. Let's test this real quick. So I will add this highlight class to one of the players. Let's add some inline tiles to position it. Awesome. Now one extra thing what we can do is at 50% we can increase its size. So I'll put transform. Alright, now we are displaying the active player here, but let us also highlight the player's base. So for that I'll go to my index.html again and I will create a new element, and I have 2 bases. Again I will give the player ID attribute here to specify which player it belongs to. Let's style this as well. Let us give it some height and width. Let's give position relative to our Ludo element, and then here we can give top as 0 and left as 0. Let us also give box sizing as border box. We can actually do this for all the elements to reset their box sizing. So I'll cut this from here. Alright, let's go back. Again we need to position these bases according to the players, so let's do that. For player 1 it will be bottom left. We can get rid of these positions. Oops, this should be player base. Alright, and for player 2 the position would be top right. Let us increase the border so that it covers this complete thing. And then we will give different colors again. For player 1 we have this light blue, and for player 2 we have this. Now it's not visible because the color matches the background image. Now let's animate this player base element. So I'll go to my index.html. I can get rid of this, and here I will add a class highlight. And here let us create an animation. So at 50% we are changing the border color to white with some opacity. Alright, now that we have our HTML ready, let us write some JavaScript. Now to position these piece elements, what we can do is we can number each and every cell or each and every point where a piece could possibly be present, and then we can store their coordinates. Let us go to our constants.js file. So I have already created one object coordinates map where the key is the cell number and the value is the x and y coordinates. That means the number of boxes the given cell is from the left and number of boxes from the top. So we have this written for all the possible points where a piece could be present. Let us define few more constants like the length of each box, which would be 100% divided by 15 boxes is 6.66. So let's store that. Now we have all our constants which we need. Now we have this UI.js file where we will write our DOM manipulations. Before starting to write the logic for our Ludo.js, let us define some static methods here which will help us for DOM manipulation. So I'll create and export a class here, UI, which will have static methods. So first let us define a method which will add a click listener to our dice button. Now first we need to query our dice button. And here on the dice button I will add an event listener. Click, and we need to pass the callback function which we can accept as an input. We can do the same thing for our reset button as well as the player pieces elements. So instead of applying click listeners to all the pieces elements, we will apply only single listener to player pieces, and we can use event bubbling to catch this. Now let us define a method to set the position of given player and given piece at a given position. So it will accept the player ID, the piece ID and the new position. Player ID would be string, this would be number, and again the new position will be number, which is the cell number. Here first we need to grab the player pieces element, so let's query them. I will create an object to store them. So we have p1 and p2. For p1 I can use document.query selector all to get all the pieces which will have this attribute player ID as p1 and this class player piece. We can do the same thing for player 2. So this object has two properties p1 and p2 which will have array of piece elements. So you can go down here and then first let me get the coordinates of this new position or the cell number. So we have already stored this information in our constants file which is in coordinates map. Now we can just import this from our constants.js. Let us come back here and I will use this and I'll get the coordinates for the new position. and I can store them in a variable. I will use array destructuring and put x comma y because the first position is x and the second position is y. Now I can grab the piece element which we need. We have this player pieces element, so I can specify the player ID here and then the piece ID which would be the index. Let's actually write a null check before doing any of this thing. Alright, now that we have our pieces elements and the new coordinates, we can set the top and left values. So I'll take this piece element. This would be x multiplied by the step length. And then finally the unit, which is percentage. The same thing for left as well. Actually top should be y and left should be x. Awesome. Let us test this method before moving forward. So I can call this UI dot set piece position method, and let's say I want player 1's first piece to be positioned at cell number 0. Oh, we need to import this file first in our Ludo.js. So let us import. Oops, we need to specify that this is a static method. Alright, now the piece is positioned at cell number 0. Let us add some styles so that it can come in the center. So I'll go to my player piece. Then I can add some transform and translate it to 50%. Alright, now we need to add the same thing in our keyframes as well. Alright, let's move on to the next method, which is set turn, which will take index of the player. So what we can do is we can set this active player and specify the player ID here, as well as we can animate the player's base. Once again, before proceeding, let us add some null checks. So the index can be either 0 or 1 in our case. Alright, first we will display the player ID and then we can highlight the player. Now here let us query the active player element, and inside this we have a span. We need to update that. So I'll set the inner text. Let's grab the player. I'll call this method here, set turn of 0, which should display p1. Alright, now let us highlight the base. I will first query the base element, which will have this attribute player ID of given player, and then we also have this class player base. We can grab this and we can get the class list and add highlight. We have already created this class and the animation. Let us save this. Awesome, it is highlighting now. Now if I do set turn of 1, it should highlight player 2. Although it has updated this element, but it is highlighting both the players. That's because in the first call we have highlighted this, so it stays highlighted. We need to remove the highlight class. So before highlighting, we can grab the elements which will have this highlight class, and then we can remove this class highlight. Oops, let us add one null check here. So I'll store it in some variable, and if we have this active player, then we can remove the class. Alright, now it is highlighting correctly. Now we need some methods to enable or disable this dice button. We can disable it until the player makes any move. So I'll have this again static method. We already have this dice button element. I will use remove attribute, and we can remove the disabled if you want to enable it, and then if you want to disable the button, we can set this attribute disabled. Let us test that as well. We need to keep the style for disabled state, so here let me add that, and the button is disabled. We will set the opacity to, let's say, 0.5. Awesome. Now let us enable it back again. Cool. Now let's write a static method to highlight the given pieces. Now we can take the player ID as input as well as the pieces which we need to highlight. Let us define the types. So we can loop through these pieces. Now we can grab the piece element, and then I can add this highlight class to this piece element. Okay, let us test this as well real quick. Let's say I want to highlight the first piece of player 1. Awesome. Now similarly we will need a method to unhighlight all the pieces. So here I can select all the player pieces which have this class highlight, and then I can loop through them, and then I can grab this class list and remove this class highlight. Let us test this as well. After this I will do unhighlight pieces, which will unhighlight all the pieces. Awesome. And let's finally complete this UI.js file by defining a method which will set the dice value. We can display it somewhere. So we will query our dice value element, and then I can set the inner text to the given value. Let us test that as well. Awesome. Now let's move on to our Ludo.js file. So I'll comment this and I'll go to my Ludo.js file. Here we need some properties, like we need one property to store the current positions of all the pieces. I'll create an object which will have p1 and p2, which are arrays which will store the cell numbers of all the pieces. And then we need one property to store the dice value. Now what I want is, whenever I set this.dice value, it should automatically update the DOM. For that I can use getters and setters. So I will change this to underscore dice value, and I will define this getter function dice value, which will return underscore dice value. And then we have this setter function which will have a parameter of new value, and then we can set this value to our underscore dice value. One more thing which we can do here is we can call this UI method set dice value, and I will pass this new value. So let us test this. In our constructor I will set this dot dice value to something like 4. Now if I save, it reflects here. Similarly we need one property to store the turn. Again I will do the same thing. So when I'm assigning some value to this property turn, it is displaying the active player, which is p1, and it is highlighting the base as well. And then we need one more property to store the state of our game. And here, based on the state value, I can enable or disable the dice. So if the state value is dice not rolled, I will import this state, and in this case I can enable the dice. Else if the state is dice rolled, I can disable the dice. Let us check that. So I will update the state to dice not rolled. It doesn't do anything. If I do dice rolled, it should disable the button. Yep. Alright, I can get rid of this code, And let us apply some click listeners to our buttons. So I'll create a method listen dice click. Inside this I can use this listen dice click which we have in our UI class, and here we need to pass a callback function. So I'll create another method, we can call it on dice click, and then I will pass this here. Now here I can write a console message. Let me call this listen dice click, which applies a click listener. Awesome, when I click on it, it should give me this message. Yes. If I want to console log this dot turn here, now if I click, it will say undefined. That's because the reference to this has been changed now. Now this will point to the button element. So I can show you that. It is giving us the button element. Now to change this, what we can do is we can bind our method with this. Now if I save this and click on the roll button, it is giving our instance of Ludo. If you want to learn more about it, I will leave a link in the description. Similarly, we can do the same thing for reset button. Now we can add click listeners to our pieces elements as well. So I will create another method, listen piece click, and on piece click. Now if I click on our piece element, it should give me this. Now if you remember, we have applied a click listener on the complete players element. So if I go to my elements tab, we have this player pieces. So listener has been attached to this complete element. So if I click anywhere, go back to console, if I click anywhere, this piece click method would be fired. So what I can do is I can see the target. If it is player piece element, then I can proceed. So here we will have access to this event, and let me grab the target. Now if the target doesn't have this class player piece, so I can get the class list, then I can simply return. Now if I click anywhere else, oops, this is contains. Alright, if I click anywhere else, it would return from here, and if I click on the piece element, it reaches here. So here I can have another method, handle piece click, which will take the player ID and the piece ID, and we can do the operations needed for on piece click. Now we can call this method here. We also need to pass the player ID and piece ID. Now if you remember, we already have mentioned player ID and piece ID here in the attributes, so we can grab those attributes. So our player ID would be player -id, and similarly our piece ID would be piece-id. Now I can pass this here. Let us test that as well. Let me console log here. Awesome. Alright, let's create a new method which will set the piece position. Again, this will take the player ID, the piece ID, and the new position. Now we already have this method defined in our UI class, set piece position, where I can pass this same exact thing. Now in our constructor, let us call this method to test it. I've saved the files. Awesome, it's working. Apart from just updating the DOM, we also need to update our property current positions, which we have over here. So let's do that as well. So I can take these current positions and get the player and the piece and add the new position. And now we have this reset game. Now here we can set the current positions to the base positions. So I can just take current positions. I already have this base positions object which we have defined, and we can simply assign this to our current positions, and then we need to update the DOM as well. So I can loop through all the players, and for each player we have 4 pieces which are 0, 1, 2 and 3. I can loop through them as well, and for each piece of given player I can call this set piece position. I have this player and piece, and now the new position would be this dot current positions of given player and given piece. Let us save this. Let us call this by clicking here. Awesome. On clicking, it is setting it to default. Let us reload and try again. Awesome. Now if we directly assign the base positions here to our current positions, it will be copied as reference, and then if we update the current positions, the changes will be reflected in our base positions constant as well, which we don't want. So what we can do is we can create a clone of this or copy of this base positions and assign that. So for that we have this structured clone method available in JavaScript. I can use that. Now let us define a method which will move the piece by given number of steps, which can be used when I click on a player piece to move by the given dice value. It will take the player, the piece, and number of steps to be moved by. Now here I could simply call the set piece position and then pass the player and piece. I can grab the current position of the player and the piece, and I can add this move by to it. So let's call this move piece method here. I will pass the player and piece, and let's say we want to move it by 5 steps whenever I click on it. If I click on this, it has moved by 5 steps. If I click on it again, it's moving again. But it is going very abruptly. It should actually go via each and every steps in between. So we need to add a few more things. Let's comment this. Let me create an interval which will run every 200 milliseconds. And here we can increment the piece position one step at a time. So I will create this method in a second. Now this method should move the given piece one step at a time. So let us define that. Here I can use the set piece position, and I need to pass the new position or the new incremented position. Now I could simply take this current position and add +1 to it, but there are few edge cases. Like for player 1, when the piece is at position 50 or the turning point which we have already defined, it should go inside the home entrance and not on 51. So we need to calculate that new incremented position. First we need to grab the current position of given piece, and then we can check if it's at the turning point. So I'll create a new variable, new position, to store the new position or the incremented position, and I can check if current position is equals to the turning point. We have already defined this in the beginning, which will give us the turning point of that player, and if that matches our current position, then we should return the first point of our home entrance of given player. So we already have this home entrance as well. We need to assign this to incremented position. There is one more case. If the piece is at point number 51, and after 51 it should go to point number 0, so we can check that as well. So if current position equals 51, incremented position would be 0. And finally, if both of the cases doesn't match, then we can just simply set the incremented position to be current position +1. Let's actually move all of this in a different method. I'll create a method called get incremented position. And instead of maintaining this, I could simply return the value, and I don't need this else as well. So now I can use this method here, get incremented position of given player and the piece. And now when I click on this piece, this move piece method will be fired, and which creates an interval and which will call this increment piece position every 200 milliseconds, which should move our piece. So let's click on this. Awesome, it is moving. We can add some transition so that it moves smoothly. So let's go back to our style CSS here, and I can add some transition. Awesome, let us reload this. Now if I click on it, it moves smoothly. Let us test our edge cases as well. So I will go back to my Ludo.js file, and here I will set the position to, let's say, 50. If I click on save, now if I click on this player piece, it should go in the home entrance and not here. Awesome. Let's test other case as well, which is for player 2. If it is at 51, it should go to 0. Awesome. And now let us write the stop condition because it is not stopping. So I'll go back to my move piece method, and here we can decrement this move by after each step, and then we can check if move by is equals to 0. In that case we can clear this interval. Now first we need to store the interval ID, and then I can use this clear interval and pass the interval ID. So here on piece click I am calling this method and I'm passing 5. So it should move by 5 steps and stop. Let us try that. Awesome. Now that we have almost all the building blocks ready, let us complete the game by executing the flow. Alright, so let's go to our dice click method. First thing is we need to generate a new dice value. I will use this snippet, which will give me a random number between 1 and 6. And then we need to update the state as well, which will be now dice rolled, which will also disable our dice button. Now we need to check for the pieces which are eligible. I will create another method for this. Let us define this method. First we grab the player ID which is active now. We can do that using our players constant, and then I'll pass this turn, which is the index of our active player. And here we need to grab the eligible pieces of that player, and then if we have at least one piece which is eligible, we move forward, or else we increment the turn. So let's say I store this in this variable, and I will create this method in a second. Get eligible pieces, which should return us all the pieces which are eligible, and then I check if eligible pieces dot length is greater than 0, then I proceed, or else I can increment the turn or pass to another player. So I can do that by updating my turn property. If turn is 0, I will change it to 1 or else 0. We also need to set the state to dice not rolled again, so that we can enable the dice button. Let's actually move this in a new method. I'll copy this and create a new method, increment turn. I'll paste this here, and I can remove this and call my increment turn. Let us define this method as well. Get eligible pieces. Now here we will take all the pieces first, and then we need to filter out the pieces which are not eligible. So I will apply a filter here. Now I can grab the current position first of the given piece. We can actually expect player ID as well. We already have it here. We will pass it. Now I need to grab the current position of given player and piece. Now there are 3 cases where a piece is not eligible, otherwise it is eligible. So I can first return the default case, and then we can define the cases where it is not eligible. The first case is if the current position of that piece is already at home. So we check that by comparing it with our home position. Now again we already have this defined. We need player ID here, and then if it is true we will return false, which will filter out the piece which is at home. And then other case is if the piece is at base position and the dice value is not 6. So we can see if base positions of given player includes the current position and the dice value is not 6. In this case as well we will return false. And then there is one last case, which is when the piece is in the home entrance and the dice value is greater than required. So we can check that using this home entrance variable, and then you need to check if this includes the current position. If yes, there is one more condition, which is the dice value is greater than what is required. Now the required value we can get by subtracting the current position with the home position. So we can grab the home position first of given player ID, and then we can subtract current position from it. Again in this case as well we will return false. Awesome. Let's test this function real quick. Let us check the first case when the player is already at home. Home position.p1. We save. This is already at home. We can actually reset the game before this so that we position all the pieces at their base, and then we are setting this position at home. And then let's say if I'm setting dice value to v6, and I will call this get eligible pieces of p1. I can log this message. Now it should give me these 3 pieces which should be eligible and not this piece. Yeah, we have 1, 2, 3 and not 0. Okay, now if I change this dice value to, let's say, any number other than 6, I should get an empty array. Yes. And the third case is if this is in the home entrance. So let me change this to home entrance of p1 of, let's say, 0. If I save it, now it should get any value less than or equal to 5. Now if the dice value is, let's say, greater than 5, which is 6, again it should give me these 3 elements and not this. Perfect. Let us comment this code back again, and let's come back here. Now we'll have this eligible pieces. I can just highlight the pieces. For that I already have this method defined in our UI class, which is highlight pieces. Here we can pass the player ID and the pieces which needs to be highlighted. And I will go to my dice click method, and then let's say I will hardcode this to 6 for a second. Now if I save and click on roll button, oops, there is some issue. Oh, we have this turn as undefined. So in the reset game, actually let's set the turn to default, turn to player 1, and then the state as well to dice not rolled. Yeah, now it is highlighting the player 1 because we have set turn to 0. And if I click on roll, it should give me 6 as the dice value, and it should highlight all the pieces. Awesome. And if I click on any piece, it should move this piece. Oh, looks like there's some problem with the z index. Let me increase the z index for our players. And yeah, this can be clicked now. If I click any piece, oops, we have not defined this case when the pieces are at base position. So I'll go back to my handle piece click method, and here I can check if the pieces are at base position. So in that case I can set them to position 0, otherwise I will move the pieces. So I can check base positions of given player includes the current position. You can grab the current position first, and then I can pass it here. If this is the case, I can set the piece position of given player and piece to the starting point. We already have the starting positions constant again. We can pass the player, and we also need to set the state back to dice not rolled, because whenever we move a piece out of the base, we give it one more chance. So I can turn from here. If I click on roll and click on any piece, we'll go at base, and it's still player one's chance. Also, one more thing is we need to unhighlight these pieces once we move. So what we can do is I will go back to my setter method of state, and here whenever the state is changed to dice not roll, I will also unhighlight the pieces. So I can do unhighlight pieces. I will save this, test again. Awesome. Again it's player one's turn. If I click on it again, I'll get 6. I can move anything. Oh, we need to unhighlight this before calling the move piece as well, which is here. So let me do that. Let's test again. If I click on roll again, it will highlight if I move. Awesome. Now because we have hard coded this 6, it will always be player one's turn. So let's remove that. Let's save our files. So if I click on roll, I got dice value as 2 and no pieces of player 1 are eligible. So the turn has moved to player 2, and then if I click on the roll again, oh, we need to enable the roll. We already did that in increment turn. Oops, there is some issue here. It should be this. I'll save again. If I click on roll, I got 1. Now the turn is of player 2, and again the dice button is enabled. When I click on it, again we got 2 and not 6, so it keeps on moving unless we get 6. We got 6 for player 2. Oops, we have forgot to increment the turn in move piece as well. So once the player is moved, we will increment the turn. Alright, coming back to our flow. After moving the piece, we need to check for win. So we can do that here. We will define a new method here. I will call it as player 1, which will take the player ID, and it should return true if all the pieces are at home position. So I can take all the pieces and I can use every method, which will return true if the callback function of this every method returns true for all the pieces. So we can return this. Now here we need to check if the current position of given player matches the home position. So we can grab the current position of the given player and the piece, and we need to compare it with the home position of given player. If this is true, then player has won. Let us use this method here. I will check if has player 1 of the active player ID. If this is the case, we can simply alert player, and then I can give player ID, and I could reset the game after this. Let us test this real quick. I will again go back to my constructor, and I will set the piece position of all the pieces except one at home. If I save my file, all the pieces are here except one, which is here. Now again I can change the dice value to 1, and we also need to change this hard-coded value. Instead of this, we will pass dice value. Also, when this check passes, we are resetting the game, and we should return now because it will increment the turn. So let's save the file. If I click on roll, click on this piece, awesome, it says player 1 has won. If I click on OK, it should reset the game. Awesome. Now finally, let's add kill functionality. Here we can check for kill. I will call this method, which we will define in a second, and we can pass the player ID and the piece which was moved. And yeah, let's define this method. So here first we need to get the current position of the player and piece, and then we will iterate through all the pieces of the opponent player, and here we can get the position of the opponent. Let us grab the opponent player ID, and we have piece. So here we can simply check if current position matches the opponent position. When this is true, we have one more condition, that the current position should not be at the safe position. So we can grab the safe positions variable, and then this should not include the current position. If this is the case, then we can kill the player, or basically set the player piece position to base. So I'll call set piece position, then I will pass my opponent player ID and then the piece which has been killed, and the new position would be the base position. So I'll grab base position of the opponent of given piece. You can also maintain a flag, and whenever a player is killed, I will set this to true so that we can return it. Now if we go back, we can store the return value, and then we can check if is kill or dice value is 6. We'll set the state to dice not rolled, and we will not increment the turn, so we will return here, so that once a player kills the other player or the dice value is 6, we give the current player +1 chance. Now let's test this functionality. Again, I will go back to my constructor. I can get rid of this. For player 1, I set it at position 0, and for player 2, let me set it at 1. And again, let's change the dice value. It's already 1. Okay. So now if I click on roll, I should get 1, and if I click, it should kill this player, which means it should send this player at their base position. Awesome. And yeah, our game is ready. Well, that is it for today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed watching the video. If you did, leave a like and comment down your thoughts below. I'll try to upload similar videos consistently, so don't forget to subscribe my channel and hit the bell icon. This is Sohail signing off. See you in the next one.